Hi, this is Gayle with BERNINA of Naperville, and I wanted to show you. I know it's weird because, like, the sun is out, it's warm, I'm getting ready to go to a polo match, but it's never too early to start preparing for your holiday projects. And we got loads of advent calendar panels here at the store, and something clicked in my brain, and it was like, hey, wouldn't you like a little quick tip on doing edge to edge or quilting one of these panels on your new Bernina 990? I thought you would. So here's the deal. This is a class that is not really a class. It's just like a little thing to get the gears, working in your brain, and just some little tips. However, we are going to be doing an edge to edge tutorial on how to quilt fat quarters with soft and stable so that you can make them into little lunch bags. So this is just kind of to wet your whistle just a little bit. Key ingredients here that I'm going to use to keep my advent calendar folded in place is some fusible woven and the OESD glue stick. Then I'm going to press out my panel, and we have a couple of these at the store, but we're going to do this one that is the little pretzels. Nah, they're not pretzels. They're gingerbread. So as I'm pressing this, I notice that this panel is a little tilted, so I'll show you how to make up for that. But on each of these, there's a fold line. There's 2 fold lines per pocket. So you're going to take that bottom fold line and kind of squeeze it and bring it up to the black portion of the panel. And then the other fold will naturally go on that other fold line. So we're going to pinch, lift it up to where that little black portion of the pocket starts, and then kind of peek under there to make sure that that crease that's being created is on that other fold line. And if it's not, you're going to adjust it. The first one, it's always the most tricky one, right? And then when you get the hang of it, it's easy going after that. And then it really does help to work with some steam when you're pressing this down, because it'll really get that nice and flat. And I'm using my Laura Star Smart U here, and the board actually has a fan in it. And the fan is drawing the steam through the board for this application. There's another application where you can blow the steam up, but once I get that pocket creased nicely, I'm going to use my glue stick, and I'm going to be a little bit generous with it to hold my flap into place. Now, don't worry, this is washable, but also after it dries clear, and it'll just be really easy to hold everything into place. I mean, another way to do it would be to baste it, but you don't need to do that. And then I just am going to complete each one of these rows. Now, this advent calendar, it's not in order by number, so it has to, it makes the kids like search for the number when you put the treats in them. Here's my bottom piece that's a little wonkier than the rest. So I'm just using the steam to kind of encourage this fabric into position. And I am going to tweak it a little bit as we press. I'm stretching the fabric a little bit just to make sure that it lines up and looks relatively square like the rest of those blocks. Sometimes these panels can get a little wiggly on the end because of how they're printed. And so I'm just trying to correct that here with the iron and the steam. Looks pretty good at this point. So I'm going to do my final gluing here to make sure everything gets pressed down into position. And I've sped up some of the portions of this video, so it takes that glue a little bit longer to dry. But now I'm going to just gently flip this over and just make sure all of your folds are going in the right way and all of that stuff. And then once you've got it into position, we're going to add our fusible backing to it, and that will keep everything nice and tidy back there. So we can work with it, we can quilt it, we can do all of those things. And I actually buy my fusible woven on the roll like you saw me show you. So with that in mind, I just take my fusible woven right off the roll, lay it only on the brown and black areas there. This is how I'm measuring it out. It actually comes out to be less than a yard. But if you're purchasing it, a lot of stores will, sell this in yard cuts only. But I use it a lot, so I make sure I get a roll of it. Also, when you adhere this fusible woven is the OESD fusible woven, and I like the adhesive on this. It really likes steam to set it, and this stuff works really well. There are other fusible backings and things like that, and sometimes the adhesive on the back I'm just not as big of a fan of, so this stuff I really like. I also really like the Pellon SF101. That one works too. And then once everything's adhered, you're going to trim right on the edge, the line of the brown for the Advent calendar. And what I'm trimming off there are some to and from tags that you could use on a quilt or to label this project even. So you're going to want to save those, but we're not going to use them for this project. Then back at my table here, my little work table, I'm laying down batting on a 1 yard cut of fabric. And these are little candy cane fabrics. And I'm laying down this scrap piece of batting. It's the same, it's just a little bit wider than the width of my panel. And make sure that I get all my fuzzies picked off of there. And then I'm going to spray that too. So I've sprayed the fabric, I've sprayed the batting, and now I'm laying my panel into position. And this is going to base this in place enough for me to take over to the machine. And I always base like the top portion first and then the bottom portion. So step one is easy. We're going to use our Bernina walking foot. I'm using this new limited edition red one that I love so much. It works just the same as the white one, but I just like it because it's red. And I do have this on my Bernina 990. And I am simply going to stitch in the middle of these horizontal brown pieces, and I'm using a Wonderfill cotton 50 weight 3-ply thread for my quilting. And I'm going to use that when I do my embroidery as well. And I'm stitching this around without stopping and starting my thread. I'm just keeping this one continuous line. You can do it however you want. You could even quilt it in a different pattern than I'm doing. But I found that this was a great way to make this look really neat and also to make sure that we have those defined pocket areas. Once I do all of my horizontal stitching, then I'm going to come back and I'm going to do the vertical stitching. And in the vertical stitching, I make sure I land right on my previous stitching there and stitch right on top of that horizontal stitching. See that? I've even got my laser lined up to that. And now I'm going to stitch the vertical lines to separate the pockets. And I don't really care where I'm stopping at that bottom portion because it's going to be hidden with the binding anyway. But I do want to be careful in these spots at the top there of the Advent numbers because we want that to look like one solid line. And then I'm just going to finish by securing the rest of the piece at the top. And then we will be able to cut our thread at this point and hoop up our design and put it on our machine. So I'm using my giant hoop for this, and I want to get everything nice and flat under there. And sadly, this Merry Christmas is not going to fit in one giant hooping, but good news is it is an amazing way to kind of wet your whistle with this technique. So I'm going to move this over to the top left portion of it. And the idea is that I want to kind of embroider half of it or quilt it, not embroider. We're going to computerize quilting it in the top half portion, and then we'll rehoop and we'll put it in that bottom portion to complete our quilting motif. And anytime you're hooping a giant hoop like this, you want to make sure that you get everything securely inside the hoop And you don't want to overcrank that ratchet. Overcranking the ratchet could result in breaking the ratchet, and you certainly don't want to do that. You also want to make sure that all of your fabric is not under the hoop when you start your scan. And speaking of scanning, so you're going to go down to that human eyeball down at the bottom left corner, which exposes this new tool. And it's the zoom in and zoom out slider that allows you to really get a peek at what's in your hoop there. Of course, there's a default button that will get you back to fill the screen. Then you can show crosshairs, show grid. You can turn things off that you have showing in the hoop that are distracting you temporarily. And then there is our magic scanning button that's at the top. So that's the one we're going to use today. And we have a drop-down menu of selections. Obviously, no background is the default. Then you can do color if you wanted to see a certain way a color would look, but we're going to do the scanned image. And there's a scanning button right there, and that's what is going to scan our fabric that's hooped up in our hoop. It wants us to attach the hoop, which we're going to do. And then it also is going to prompt us in this new software or the new firmware update that just came out to remove the presser foot and deselect it from the presser foot list. So let me show you how to do that. And we're going to X out to go back. Then we're going to go to our presser foot and we're going to deselect it and see how it doesn't show up and the 26 is in red. Then we're going to go back to scan and pick our scanned image and now select that button again. Yes, I want to wiggle it around and now it's scanning. Once we've scanned and you see that my machine there is in sped up mode, right? Let's take a moment to just look through appropriate designs that are actually computerized quilting designs on your 990. You have your embroidery designs, and if you look in your quilting folder, all of these designs that say BQM on them are Bernina, Quilt, Matic, or whatever designs. These are designs where the machine is not interpreting every bit of information of the stitch, it's interpreting the movement so it can make like that shape that you see there. But it's actually pulling information for the stitch length from a setting in your settings. So if we go to our hamburger button, which is here, and we go to our settings button, which is here, and we go down to embroidery, you'll see that the last selection here is stitches per inch. That's customizable quilt designs. And the default setting is 10. I don't really have a problem with our stitch length being 10 in this application, but if you are going to make your designs smaller, you probably want to go up a higher number because 10 stitches per inch is a longer stitch than 16 stitches per inch. So I usually use 10, 14, and then maybe even a little bit bigger when I have heavier thread. So maybe like a 6 or something like that. But it's just a matter of personal preference. Now, obviously, if you are using 6 stitches per inch and your design is really tiny, you are not going to have a good result. But more about this topic later in other videos. Once you've made your selection and adjusted it, however, or double check that you have the right stitches per inch, you're going to back out of this, and then you're ready to select your quilting design. In my case, I'm using this design 12416, number 15, and there it is. Now, once the design is selected, let's go into the edit button, the little crayon, and learn a little bit more about it. And there's a new feature under our edit screen for BQM files, or the computerized quilting files, and it's show start and stop. And basically a green circle is a start and a red cross is a stop. Now I want to rotate this design so that my stop is at the bottom of my screen, and now that's the design I want to choose. Now it's going to be all about how this looks with our scan to get our design just right. However, our scan is dark So I want to change the color of my embroidery design, not because I want to stitch it in yellow, but because I want it to show up on this fabric that I've scanned, and you can see it there. So now I'm using the little nodes to just resize my design in conjunction with my scan, get things placed, see how I like it, see if indeed, it jives with what I'm looking for, right? And my goal is to get this design so that the half point where it ends, that stop point I showed you, is right in between the third box and the fourth box on my advent calendar. And so I tweak and I tweak and I tweak. I did hoop this relatively straight, so I didn't have to worry about using pinpoint placement here. I'm just using my camera to make sure that I got it in there in the way that I want. There could be a little bit of checking that I need to do with virtual positioning. Virtual positioning is where I'm simply going to touch the side of one of my pieces to make sure where I touch the side of the stitching to just see where it lands in conjunction with my hoop, with how it is in the hoop. I can also use my knobs to move it around, but what's happening here is I'm touching a section to make sure it's just where I want it, and now I can pull my thread up command and start stitching my design. And once the design stitches out, I'm going to remove it from the hoop, but here's the deal. I'm leaving the bottom part of my hoop on the machine so that I can just slide my work into position, kind of like I'm using my 990 as a master hooper. And I'm going to get that in my hoop area, place that ring back on, get everything positioned just so. And this not only saves me time, but really does help me be a little bit more accurate with my hooping. And it is nice to have it kind of stuck in place as I get all of this stuff wiggled into position. And once again, just a reminder, don't over tighten that ratchet. And then I did have to kind of, pull at my little pieces there just a little bit, just to encourage it to be in the hoop. You know what I mean? So now that we have that back into position, we're going to go back over and we're going to scan this hoop again. We go to our scanned image. We're going to hit the scanning button and off we go. We have to scan again because now we have a different part of the design. We've got this bottom part, and we also have a previously stitched design in there that we can see. So I'm going to accept my changes. And now I'm taking my design and simply moving it down. And the idea is that I want where this design is going to start. I want to zoom in and line it right up where the other design ends. And you can see right there, exactly there. You might even overlap by a millimeter or so if you want to be careful. Then you can also hit the camera at this point to see how close you really are with the camera. And you can see there, I should have taken my foot off for that, but I'm close. I feel confident. Between the laser, the camera, and all of this, we're good. So I'm opening up pinpoint placement, and I'm going to use the portion of pinpoint placement that's the grid. We also have free point, we have morph, but I don't want to do any of that. I just want to touch that bottom right corner and get my motif into position. And to some of you, it might seem like I did this a little backwards. I lined things up first, and then I did pinpoint placement. And then here I am doing pinpoint placement, but you can do it however. That top center marking of the grid is actually exactly where that first stitch of the design is. So in this case, it happens to not matter what I pressed, but there's lots of different ways to do things. And once I had centered it on that spot, I noticed that some of the design, because I had scanned it, I could see was going to fall out of the area I want to quilt. So I went back to pinpoint placement to tweak it. But you do always want to make sure that you're testing that like start stop area at the top there, because that is the most important spot, because we want to definitely make sure that it looks like the two hoopings that we have were one cohesive piece. And then once that's into position, I set my pin, and then I'm going to touch this top center and kind of wiggle this into position so it's right where I had kind of moved it manually. And then this is moving my needle exactly on that spot again. And then I'm ready to stitch it out. So I make sure my quilting settings are on just like before. And I'm going to go off to the races here. And I'm going to start stitching again, remembering to use my thread up command and stitch. Now the 990 is fast, but this has been sped up just a little bit. And then once this has stitched out, we can remove the work from the machine, take it out of the hoop, trim it up, and bind it. And I think I'm going to pick a binding that, you know, kind of matches that little toasted gingerbread look on this advent calendar. But I'm very pleased with the way that came out, and it even matched up pretty nicely in the middle. You can see there where I'm clipping, looks great. And let's have a look at it on the other side here, because you guys, you always want to see the back, you know, but it looks good. And one thing you'll notice with the new features of these quilting adjustments that are in the 790 Pro and the 990 is that you don't get the knotting underneath with your computerized quilting stitches. So now it's just time to trim. And I'm going to trim this on the sides and the bottom right up to that brown edge of the advent calendar. But on the top, I'm only going to trim the batting because I'm going to do a sleeve that's made from my backing fabric. And the way that I do that is I just leave my backing longer at the top there. And then I'm going to fold in the edges and fold the flap up to make this sleeve. So let's turn this over and see what we're doing here. So you can see it's a little wide, but we're going to turn this over. And now I'm going to bring it back and fold it in on itself like this. And I don't want to have that selvage edge in there. And I mean, everybody, okay, clutch your pearls. I'm ripping the fabric. I never do this, but I'm ripping it. It was going to take too long to make those cuts. But I'm folding it back on itself now. And then I'm folding it back over to that seam. But there's a little folded edge right there. And I am literally cutting that 1.5 inches. And I'm using my mat to do that. So I cut it 1.5 inches. Fold it over 1/4 inch, and then fold it over 1.5 inches. And I'm going to do the same thing here. And you can see how I use my mat to do those measurements when I cut it back. So fold it over. I guess I'm folding it over like 1/2 inch and then folding it over 1 inch. That detail is not necessary. So you're going to press those. Then once they're pressed and you've pressed your sleeve so it's flush with the top edge there, we can look for that binding fabric. And I found it. All right, it's an Art Gallery Pure Solid. I like to cut my bindings 2.5 inches. I'm going to go back to my red walking foot. And hey, I just want to remind you that if you are using a walking foot with your machine, it will not let you use the automatic threader. So keep that in mind. You're going to have to thread it manually. I'm using a blind hem stitch. I'm not changing any settings, but what this does is it's going to take a little bite there on the left and grab my quilt backing, not the batting or anything like that. I've got it lined up so it's just taking a little bite out of my backing. And this is folded like you would make a blind hem. And this is just me desperately avoiding hand stitching. But this is a great way to do a sleeve. And of course, with an advent calendar like this, you sort of want a sleeve on the back because you know you're going to be hanging it. Pull that glue loose from your pockets, have a look at the back and the front and admire your work. It's done. And now we're going to head on to more projects. This one is a little bigger. This one is a Ruby Star one. It comes with pennants, little plushies, and of course, the advent calendar portion. This one might go in my house. Now, that video that I was talking about with the edge to edge, that's going to premiere in a few days. But hope this kind of gets the creative juices flowing in the meantime. And don't forget, we have a lot of other videos that don't involve the 990 or involve the 990 and whatever. And they all live on our Bernina of Naperville YouTube channel. It's easy. It's youtube.com/Bernina of Naperville. And there you can like, comment, and subscribe. Happy sewing and happy holidays. Now, off to the polo match. And my money is on the team that's riding the horses.